What we are intending to do, Vanessa and I, is we're going to quickly run through the programme, give a little bit of detail, as I say, focus on the two key areas where we understand from Arts Council where this will be the most challenging for supplier organisations such as yourself to be able to put some answers together. While we're going through the programme, if people have questions, if they'd like to use, as Nikki was saying, if they use group chat for the moment in time, and then what we can do at the very end of the session is if anybody has a specific question that they wanted to ask and go on to verbal, we can do that at the very end. But what tends to happen is the questions are coming out often in themes from there. One thing that we will say is that some of the questions that you may well have will be very specific and very particular and will require a decision by Arts Council. They are, and they understand that the majority of organisations will have very general queries and issues around the programme, but organisations may well have something very specific to them that they may well need to seek the advice and support of Arts Council through the grants management team, and they are committed to trying to get responses to you as soon as possible, and we'll certainly do that within 2 working days. That's the pledge at the moment in time. So we will, where necessary, we will refer you to contact Arts Council from there. Little bit of background, as Nikki said, I am a funding specialist. I've worked within the arts and cultural sector and the heritage sector for the last 25 years, working with a range of organisations, both commercial and non-commercial. The majority of the work within that sector has been with the not-for-profit sector, because that's where the majority of the work has been, and the focus of Arts Council investment has often been on those particular sectors from there. But in part of doing that, Vanessa and I have just recently worked with an arts project in terms of doing a strategic review and a funding strategy for them to try and get themselves back to a more stable operating position. I've been a retained sponsorship consultant for Leicester City Council, managing sponsorship delivery for their programme of cultural events. And I'm also working currently with a poet author to premiere a West End play to raise funding to back that up. Vanessa, I don't know whether you just want to give a little bit of background to everybody.
Yes, hi, I'm speaking to you from far north. I'm in Edinburgh, and I've worked with arts organisations and cultural organisations, really focusing on developing them. I've done a lot of work with capital development and around the whole thing of sustainability, and have during this period done a lot of work with arts organisations around the impact of COVID and recovery. So focusing on not just how do we get through the period we're in, but how do we, in some cases, reinvent and rethink ourselves going forward. Nikki mentioned my contact with this particular area is my ex-husband was a production manager and does a lot of lighting and Sony Lumiere events, and both my sons work in major events. So I have within my sphere of colleagues and friends a number of people who work on what I call the really critical side, the creative side, and the technical side of producing work, whether it's commercial or not-for-profit.
Brilliant, thank you very much. What we're going to do then is we're going to go through, and as I say, it's just a very brief presentation, and really it is an aid memoir for me to be able to go through from there. Can I just check? Vanessa, are you able to see the slideshow?
Not, have you got it up? Have you shared?
Yeah, I thought I had from there, but obviously we share screen. There we go. Right.
Yeah, it's coming up now, yeah.
Okay. It's not sharing. Goodness me. Hang on, let me just stop
Caroline,
sharing.
it is sharing. It was sharing.
Oh, was it sharing?
Yes, if you go to share screen, go again to share it, and you need to put the little down the bottom. I'll show you what to do.
All right, okay, there we go. Let's
share it if you want it.
There we go. Right.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, fine. One of the things that we wanted to start off was just to put the context in terms of the Cultural Recovery Fund. This is the second round of the Cultural Recovery Fund. We'll give you a few details on there, a little bit of background as to how to fill the application form in, and for anyone who isn't aware about the Arts Council portal, Grantium, a few tips and hints about that. And then at the end, we'll take through and run through the questions and answers that you've been using through chat. What, as I say, is we will then, if we have time and anybody has any particular questions, we'll try and answer those where we can do from there. Okay, the background to the Cultural Recovery Fund is that it was part of, as you will all know, part of the 1.57 billion given by the by the government to fund the arts and cultural sector, which was announced last year. The first round was taken in 2 particular tranches, and the vast majority of money was given out during that time. It was given out to a wide range of organisations, but I think many of you will know and may well remember the expressions that were given out by the then Culture Secretary around how the money was going to be used, and it was clearly about supporting those cultural jewels in the crown that we have. And so a number of sectors felt themselves to be left out of this share of the money. A number of sectors found that it was difficult to actually go forward for the money, or didn't feel that the information and advice was particularly relevant. I would say that that is still very much the same. The Arts Council's focus has traditionally been on supporting not-for-profit organisations, and therefore finds it difficult at times to provide adequate guidance to commercial organisations. It is a difficulty, and I think they are aware of that, and therefore they are attempting to try and make amends for that during this particular round by running a series of sessions aimed at individual organisations being able to ask their particular questions and seek advice from there. The programme is already open. It opened on the 6th of January and it closes on the 26th of January at 12 noon. 12 noon is important. If you attempt to go on any later than that, you will not be able to go on. And I think the other thing that I would say is that one of the things we are warning is that the portal is incredibly busy, and having done any number of Arts Council bids, as it gets closer to the closing time, the particular portal becomes more and more clunky, and so it can often be very difficult to complete the pieces of work and upload everything that you need to from there. The aim of this programme, and I think this is really important that organisations understand and are aware of this, the very first set of funding and the first round of the Cultural Recovery Fund was about providing firstly emergency funding to organisations to enable them to survive. That was what it was about. It was making sure that at the end of what many people anticipated would be a very short period of time, 6 months, we would come out of all of this and have a viable sector going. It has since been proven that this is not going to be the case. This time round, the aim of the funding that is available is to support cultural organisations as they transition back. So it is about becoming back to viable and sustaining operating models. So it is clearly with the intention that we will be back to some form of operation as from April of this year. And as you'll note, the funding this time round is for a very short period of time. It is only for a quarter, for the first quarter of the financial year, so April through to June. It is being determined and dictated by DCMS. The idea that we will get all of the money out the door and the money will be utilised and will be spent supporting cultural organisations was clearly and is clearly an aim of the DCMS to make sure that that happens. And so Arts Council, as we were discussing earlier with Nikki, Vanessa and I feel that Arts Council are very much under pressure to get this money out of the door. How that relates and translates into the funding decisions that we make, we'll wait to see. Last time round, the non-specific sector of which you will fall into received 11% of the total funding that was available. But when you look at the spread of funding and you look at those grants that were over the £1 million level, it only received 3% of the funding. When you look at the smaller levels of funding up to the £1 million level, it received 8% of the funding from there on in. One of the things that you'll also notice if you look at those people who are awarded funding before is the geographical spread. Now that could well be in relation to where organisations are based, but it's also very clear is that for some areas, their access to the funding has been less than others. Arts Professional ran an article very early on after the first round of funding in which it detailed the applications of a number of not-for-profit organisations that were unsuccessful and were very disappointed to not receive anything from there. But that reflects the theme of the programme. The theme originally started out to support, as we said before, the cultural jewels, the jewels in the crown. And only at a later point was it then decided that the local organisation in terms of local museums or local art sectors could then come in and receive support from there. The amount of funding. This time around, the amount of funding for commercial organisations has been capped. The minimum grant that Arts Council are looking to award is £25,000. The maximum grant for commercial companies that Arts Council are going to be delivering is £1 million. But if you were an organisation that received within the first round of funding, any funding, that too will contribute to your total of £1 million from there on in. Essentially, and the guidance is very clear about this, is what they are looking for is they are looking to give out 25%, a quarter of annual turnover of organisations, because this programme is to fund the months April, May and June of 2021. What they're looking for is 3 months operating cost in any normal year. So, and I've given you the example there, and I'm sure many of you are working at much higher levels. Some of you may be working at slightly lower levels. On a £500,000 turnover, the rough grant that will be given out is about £125,000, and that is equating to 3 months worth of turnover in a normal year. The normal year is your last full operating year pre-COVID, so not during the last financial year, which may have been and probably was affected by COVID, but in the year prior to that. For new organisations that have come along, that may well be a challenge, because if you've only been operating during this period, what you'll need to be able to do is demonstrate what you think and some reasonable assumptions about what you think a normal year would have been, and you'll need to note that in the financial information that you provide with your bid. Eligibility. Sector-specific organisations, support organisations such as yours are eligible. We have heard a couple of experiences of organisations being told in the first round that they weren't eligible, but they are indeed. The company structure is key. Limited companies, single directorships trading up to a certain, over and above a certain level of turnover, subsidiary companies and wider companies are allowed. But here, and this is going to be for some companies a difficulty, the application must go via the wider parent company. The wider parent company can make a single application or could make a joint application on behalf of several of its subsidiary partners, but that total can only be £1 million. So that will limit down for some companies what they're able to claim on this. Limited liability partnerships are also included. Sole traders are not eligible for this fund. And that's one of the reasons the Arts Council are saying is because of the difficulty of defining sole traders. Freelancers who operate via a limited company are eligible, but you have to ensure that you come up to a certain turnover level. Any company going forward needs to be able to demonstrate at least 2 years of accounts registered with the regulatory body, and that in this instance would be Companies House, by January of 2021, by the 6th of January when the programme opened. If what has happened, and there is some guidance on this within the Arts Council on the Arts Council website, if during the time that you have been operating, you've taken steps to help the company survive, e.g. you've gone through a merger or you've changed the company structure, and or at this point in time, if you only have draft accounts but they're ready for submission, then you may still be eligible. The may is a question, and for some organisations they will need to check with Arts Council. So the accounts need to be done ready for submission. It can't simply be that you've been operating but you don't have your set of accounts. They need to be ready for submission from there on in. You may have delayed submission, but you have to have them ready to go from there on in. Very clearly, the purposes this time round are not about helping you to survive. They are about meeting the shortfall between what income you have coming in and your operating cost. And it is about meeting those costs within this quarter that organisations expect and anticipate that they will struggle to meet, and that is overheads, rent and utilities, staffing, bringing back staff, rehiring staff that may have been laid off, or rehiring new staff to come in and fill vacancies that you have, appointments of contractors and or appointments of freelancers. Those are all things that you can claim for. You can also claim for staff training to be able to operate within the new COVID new from there on in. Programming, artistic programming costs, or any programming costs that you have related to the delivery of the work that you are involved in during that 3-month period. Equipment, COVID-19 capital cost to purchase essential equipment is also included from there on in, and repaying some COVID related debts. But you'll see there that anyone who might have had a CBIL or a business bounce back loan, you cannot use Cultural Recovery Fund monies to pay back those loans, but you can use it to pay other debts incurred during the period, during the COVID-19 period, but not historic debt from there on in. Ineligible costs, as I've said there, clearing historic debt is one of those costs that is ineligible. Operating costs that fall outside the period, and this has been a bit of a challenge for some organisations. So one of the things for festivals are saying that some of the work that they may wish to include within their bid will fall outside of the 3-month period that we have, April through to June. And the word from Arts Council is that provided you have contracted for that work during this period, you can include that work in your bid and you can retain that monies and pay that money at the appropriate time, but you have to have contracts in place to be able to enable you to do that. You can't simply ask for money and hold it in the hope that over and above the period you'll be able to spend it when it comes available from there. You won't be able to include anything that is being covered by any other funding. And one of the things is at the moment in time, we are unsure what will happen about the furlough scheme. Should the furlough scheme be introduced, be extended, before you make your submission on this point, you would not be able to include, beyond the April period, you'd not be able to include staffing costs from there on in, but at the moment in time, that's not the case. And input VAT reclaimable from HMRC. There is very clear advice on the Arts Council website about what is and what isn't eligible. The process...
this is the Arts Council stuff for the grant.
Oh, we have somebody there who's unmuted. I'm not sure what that was, whether it was a point or question. Can you put it into chat? That would be really helpful. The process, you need to get yourselves registered on Grantium, which is the Arts Council application portal, and any new applications, if you haven't already had any Arts Council funding, previously, you are eligible to put forward for this programme, but you will need to set yourself up an organisational profile and have that validated by the 21st of January, the afternoon 5 p.m, the 21st of January, so that that profile can then be validated. That establishes the company as a record on the Arts Council portal, and what they need to do is they need to do several background checks into that before they can validate it. If you haven't had your application validated, if you haven't had your profile validated, you won't be able to go on and make an application. So that's your first stage. Is if you aren't registered on Grantium, go onto the Arts Council website, and there is a link through there to click on to register on Grantium from there on in. Applications, as we said, need to be received by 12 noon on the 26th of January. We are advising anybody that they go ahead before that and try and get their application in well before the 26th of January, because the application system is incredibly clunky and is liable to be very, very slow, particularly when you're uploading documents. You'll find that. The decisions, they're hoping to get all the decisions out the door by the end of March 2021, and they will come on a rolling basis. What happened in the last 2 rounds was that some organisations heard in advance, lots of organisations heard just prior to the release of the final deadline for funding decisions to be made, and then the majority of unsuccessful organisations found out on that day, so on the 31st of May. If you haven't heard by that point, it is likely that you're not going to have been successful, but you will get a letter confirming either way from there. When coming to make the decisions, there are a number of balancing factors that Arts Council will take into account, and those are not only about the quality of the application that you have made, about the information that you've provided, about the transparency of the financial information that you have included within your application, but also what they're going to do is they are looking to achieve a geographical spread. So as you may or may not be aware, Arts Council is separated into a number of different regions. So for example, there is the Midlands region, the West Midlands region, there is the South East region. And what they're looking to do is ensure that the money is spread between the geographical regions so that each of the regions gets some of the share of monies. It is fair to say that the largest share of money will go to the London area, partly because that's where a number of companies and organisations are based, but it's also because that's where some of the cultural capacity is located. But there will also be other areas and regions the other areas will also get the money as it comes through. The funding is going across all art forms and disciplines, so that includes sectors support organisations such as yourself. It includes art centres, it includes galleries, it includes museums, it includes the range of arts providers, touring and non-touring providers. There are some exceptions of organisations that have been left out of this, and the Arts Council is very clear on that. So libraries and comedy has been left out of that, as has independent cinemas. There is going to be decisions made about size and type of organisation. So the intention of Arts Council is, as before, is to share the money so that some of those very large organisations, some of those internationally recognised organisations receive funding, as well as some of those very small organisations that get funding. And those are the following two: diversity and cultural significance around opening up access are the two key drivers that will be determining where the money is given and who receives the money. And we'll come on to both of those in a moment in time. The application form, Vanessa and I have had a look at the application form, and we believe that for the majority of organisations, the questions that they're asking you are relatively easy. The first 4 of those are relatively easy for most organisations to be able to clearly detail from there. The thing to say with regards to the application form is that each of the sections has a different word count depending on the emphasis that they're putting onto that. And although the guidance notes will tell you that it is approximately 700 words to answer question 1 and 2, it is not actually 700 words when you come to fill it in. It is more like 600 words. Dashes, spaces are all included. So what you'll need to make sure is that you are really, really brief. You're working exactly to the point, and you are detailing everything that you have to say, but in the clearest and most concise way that you can from there. So this will take some considerable drafting of any application. The first question, how have you managed the impact of the pandemic to date? And what they're looking for from here is they're looking to understand how COVID has impacted on you and what responses that you've taken to managing that. So they're looking to see what actions you may have taken. Those actions could well be that you've furloughed members of staff. It could well be that you've laid off members of staff. It could well be that you've applied for and taken, made use of any of the government help that has been available, appreciating that for many of you that government help will have not been available to you necessarily. It's also looking at whether what you've done is you've taken any options, in some ways quite considerable options. So you've looked at restructuring the business, you've looked at merger, you've looked at working in partnership or suspending part of the operations entirely during the period of time. They'll also look in terms of what options you've explored about other finance that may well be available. And that's whether you've used any of the loan scheme, whether you've used any commercial loans, as well as any of the loan schemes that have come available, so the bounce back loans that have been made available. One of the things that, and a couple of questions that we've had, is about reserves. They will be looking and are looking to see what level of reserves, what level of cash is held within the business, and why you have taken the decisions to either use that money or not use that money. And what they're looking for you to explain in the application form is the level of cash that you hold within the business and why you're holding that level of cash within the business. Now, the application form immediately asks you, when you start to fill it in, to detail your current level of organisational reserve. And very clearly, this is in my view, a question that's aimed at the not-for-profit sector. What they want to know is the level of reserves that you hold and whether or not you have the right to use that money. For the not-for-profit sector, some of the funding, if it's not earned income that comes from, say, for example, ticket sales, it could well have come from philanthropic funders, so grant funders may well have given money. If that's been given for a specific and very detailed purpose, then that money will be restricted and cannot be used for general running costs. So what they're looking to understand is what monies you hold that is reserved and has a specific purpose for it, and what money that you have that you hold that is free that could be used. And the question will be asked is, why have you not used that money first and foremost? Why have you, as a priority, come back to appeal to what essentially is the public purse? Although it's a question that for many organisations, there are reasons why they haven't chosen to spend the cash that they have within the business. I myself have cash within my own business that I've chosen not to spend, but I have it invested in there. They will ask you to explore and explain why that decision has been taken. Essentially, what they're looking to be able to do is, with all of the money that they hand out, they're looking to be able to demonstrate that they have achieved value for money. So they are not supporting those companies where for the general public, there could be a perception that that company is cash rich, or that company is very well endowed and should have used its own resources. Likewise, the question could be said, and the question has been raised, about some of the national treasures that we have within the not-for-profit sector, where the level of reserve is significantly high, and those have been asked again to explain why they haven't used cash reserves themselves, why they haven't reduced senior staff salaries. So it's not just about the commercial sector, it is also happening, but to a lesser degree within the not-for-profit sector from there. Essentially, what they're looking to do in question one is they're looking to understand how you have managed the financial risks that you have faced and the actions that you have taken all within 600 words. So it is quite a challenge. And anyone who has attempted to write the form, who is writing the form at the moment, you will understand that it is a challenge to actually get over the picture of what has happened for this period of time. The second question that they're looking to understand is how you will use the money. And what they're looking for here is for you to detail and give them an explanation about how that money will be used during the period that we're talking about. And remember that it is just simply the 3-month period that we have. So how will you spend the money during the period April through to June? It is about what you'll spend it on and the categories that you'll spend it on. And there is an expenditure section within the form, but there is also a very detailed set of financial information, including both a budget and a cash flow that you need to submit with it, where you will be able to use in terms of the spreadsheet that they provide as the template that you will use. You'll be able to provide a significant amount of notes and information on the assumptions that you've made in terms of spending that money from there. So what they're asking you to do is to detail. And the key thing to remember at this point is that what they're saying is that the money that they're after is roughly 25% of your annual turnover in a normal year. What they're not anticipating is that if your annual turnover was £500,000, they're assuming then that you would be making an application for in the region of £125,000 worth of support. They're not expecting you to go in and ask for 200,000 or 400,000 because that sits well outside expenditure within that normal period. Now, there are some exceptions that you might choose to argue. So it could be around the repayment of some of the debts that you've incurred. It could be around some of the investment that you may want to make in terms of some small amount of capital investment. But that is pegged for capital investment. It is pegged at 10% of your total bid. So if you're looking for a bid of 125,000, then that capital investment can only be 12,500 roundabout from there. So what they're looking for you to do is to be able to tell them how you will use the money, and what they're looking for you to understand is how you will use that money over the period of time. They don't anticipate that you will necessarily spend the same money during April, May and June. What they're looking for you to do is they're looking for you to detail how you'll open the business, reopen the business, and what will happen with your expenditure from there on in. Question 3, how will you adapt your plans if the restrictions don't ease? Arts Council, when they were preparing this particular programme, it came at the end of the calendar year, and what they were anticipating was, having had the initial 6 months worth of support from there, that organisations who secured the emergency funding and then secured the cultural recovery funding, which would have taken them through until March of this year, that they would then be looking to reopen for the period April, May and June. And the assumptions that the Arts Council have made is that we will be back to, by the period at the end of June 2021, we will be back to a new normal, not the existing normal or the previous normal that we had, but a new normal. And that will be that venues will be open, audiences may well have returned, but may well have returned in a slightly lesser number than previously, but they will be returning to that events will be taking place. Obviously, what then happened was they put the guidance out on the day before Christmas Eve, on the 23rd of December, and then on the 26th of December, we went into the new national lockdown from there on in. And that, in their planning of this programme, had not been anticipated. What they're expecting you to do is work on the basis that restrictions are going to ease during that period, but also what they're looking for you to do is to have the what ifs those restrictions don't ease. What will be your fallback position from there? How will you ensure that what you're suggesting might happen if current restrictions continue, what you're going to be able to do from there, how you'll manage that from there on in. They're expecting that social distancing may well ease, but it may well not be lifted totally. But they are anticipating in this programme that venues and events will reopen and continue and take place and restart once again. So that is an assumption, and I think we have to work with them on that, that none of us quite know at this moment in time what is likely to happen from there. The final question that they're asking for you to do is they're asking for you to do in terms of how do you plan to ensure viability and sustainability. And this again is all about financial management and risk management. What they're really keen to understand is what systems you have in place to monitor the health of the business as you move forward from there on in. And so what they're looking for you to do is to include within your answer what financial management systems you have in terms of managing and understanding your cash flow and understanding the position of the cash within the business. What they're looking to understand is how you've come to your planning assumptions around your activity and how that might be affected and how that might impact both on your cash and your operating position from there on. They're looking at things like how you manage risk within a changing and a very fluid environment and a very constantly changing operation. And they're also looking to understand when and how you might wish to introduce or reintroduce cost-cutting measures if you haven't done so, or reconsider further cost-cutting measures, or taking advantage of government programmes as they come online, depending on the situation that we find ourselves in. So they're looking to understand what you're going to do to help keep the business and get the business out of any particular financial risk that you might have found yourselves in and ensure that it is sustainable. So it is thinking about the ways of working that you're going to be operating in. Are there going to be new ways of working that you're going to be bringing forward from there? Are there going to be new focuses of your attention from there, new markets that you're going to be looking at? But this has all got to be balanced in the sense that any turnaround of your organisation, you are planning to reopen as a viable organisation. So any sudden changes to your business model you'll be asked to explain why you've taken that decision from there. So for the majority of organisations, those 4 questions are going to be the ones that we think you're going to be able to find and reasonably answer. The 2 are the following 2 questions that we think are going to be the ones where there could well be a challenge. And Vanessa is now going to talk to you a little bit about the cultural significance, a key assessment criteria.
Hi, everybody. There are 2 in that question, which is shown as question 5 in the guidance. They say that you need to tell them about one of 2 things. You can do both, but do bear in mind you are limited to this what they call 700 words, but as Caroline has said, is actually the number of characters that is in their text box. The first one is your national and international significance within the cultural sector. And the second one is your key role in providing cultural opportunities in a community in England. I think what's important is that the sectors that seem to have, as Caroline outlined, received the lowest percentage of any of the grants that have been out there have tended to be what we would call the supplier sector to the creative and cultural industries. And I think importantly in answering this question is to look at the work you've been doing, particularly around where you've worked with cultural and creative organisations. So for instance, one of the things that Caroline talked about is how during the current situation, people have engaged much more with things like the lighting installations that have been done that still carried on as much as they could through the festive period, the development of outdoor installations, the Sonne Lumiere, and also critically, the development of digital access to many of the art forms.
How are you?
Can you mute whoever that was, please?
I've caught you finally.
Matthew
Hi.
Hart. Matthew Hart, can you mute?
A couple of minutes to spare just to talk about this.
Yes, so I was saying that as I'm sure all of you are aware, there has been a move for a number of what we would call arts-focused organisations whose buildings have been closed to create high-quality digital work that is accessible. They're now actually charging, in some cases, similar ticket prices as they would if you were in a theatre. And the role that your sector particularly plays in ensuring that that is high quality, that is innovative. And interestingly, the Arts Council and certainly Creative Scotland are focusing very much on that. So when answering these questions, I've had one question coming in about, from the regional perspective, will this be judged on where you're based? The first part of the prompts that they give you on this question is that you are an organisation which makes a major contribution to the national and international reputation of the cultural sector in England, and that you can demonstrate your commitment to excellence and innovation. So when you're answering that question, we'd be looking at possibly the work that you've done, that where you have been a major contributor to the creativity of a piece of work that is not necessarily being seen in the region in where you are based, but had a national or a significant cultural impact in another region. So the emphasis is on where you contribute to that creative cultural significance, rather than, I think, what could put some sectors off answering this is, well, we don't really do that. We work with a theatre, a dance company, an orchestra, a band, something which has us as a major contributor. The other question is around where you might contribute on a community. And if you look at that, it's where if you weren't there, that either there would not be the impact of the cultural significance within that particular community or area, or an employment impact. So for instance, if you are based in, I'm going to choose somewhere weird and wonderful, let me think, Newark in Nottinghamshire, that your actual work is not necessarily carried out in that area, but might be more national or in the Northwest, let's say. But you employ people, you make a significant contribution to employing people who are learning a creative craft in that area, or you work, say, with apprenticeships or people from significantly low employment areas, that would be seen as making a significant impact. So I think the important thing about this question is not to be put off because you don't think that you necessarily create the work yourself, but how you work in partnership with others and where that is a cultural or creative significance. Caroline?
I think the other thing that I would say is that where you have, in terms of your cultural significance, it could be, think about the partners that you're working with, and it could be that you're working in sectors that for the Arts Council are a priority sector in terms of getting support to and broadening access to cultural opportunity. So it could well be that some of your clients are, for example, it could well be the South Asian community that you supply lighting or sound to, Diwali, and Diwali as itself is a major international festival that the cities such as Leicester and Derby have a significant festival there. And it could well be that your contribution is about establishing and ensuring that the story of South Asian art and South Asian activity comes to the fore within your work as part of providing the sound or the staging, etc.
Could I also say that I think there is a section there that talks about access to buildings and area. And one of the key areas around where lighting and sound has been significant is in making areas, buildings, particularly heritage buildings, accessible in a way they were not before, because of the way in which they have been used for significant events where lighting, sound, pyrotechnics have been the attraction that has brought people to those areas. So again, that would be seen as a significant cultural impact, cultural significance of how that has made those buildings open and more accessible to people who would normally not attend or not see those as places that they go to.
And I think the thing to say in relation to this one is that it is a little bit about flagging up any previous clients or previous work that you've done. So if you've been involved in any of the significant cultural events that may have taken place. So anybody sitting within any of the City of Culture areas, you may have been involved in Hull, you may be preparing for Coventry City of Culture. You could be looking at having previously worked on or maybe working on the Olympics, previously on the Olympics, or maybe looking at working in terms of the Commonwealth Games that's coming up in Birmingham from there. It's some of those events as well that have taken place to celebrate some of the big anniversaries. So anybody who has been involved in any of the lighting or the audio-visual work that was taken around the Mayflower 200 2020 that has been put on hold or reformulated from there on in. So any of those major cultural events that have the possibility of bringing in both national visitors to a site or to a venue or to an occasion, or even international visitors. And one of the inquiries that I was dealing with was around the performance rock music. So it's an organisation, a company that provides staging for rock music, and some of the largest bands play within the regional context that they provide the staging. And of course, one of the things that you'll understand, and some of you will know, is that there is it's a major contributor to tourism and international travel, people travelling from overseas to the UK, to venues to experience cultural offers from there. So if anything that you are involved in that sits within that field, those are the times to actually flag up some of your previous work or some of your future work that you've got from there. This is about saying we are part of the fabric of the cultural offer. It may well be that the National Trust holds a number of stately homes, historic houses and areas of interest throughout the country, but actually visitors attend that and attend the lighting show that we put on. It could well be that without us, Blenheim Palace would not have generated the number of visitors that it got over the Christmas period to its external lighting events, because it was our impact that actually made that event happen. Visitors would not simply have gone without that going ahead. So that's the real key area that Arts Council are saying is sector support organisations are going to be questioned, quizzed and assessed on their contribution to that particular area. So it's about you thinking as broadly and as widely as you can about who and how and what. And if you've been involved in digital work, then the reach of digital work. I was talking to a very tiny organisation in Nottinghamshire the other day who held a series of online digital talks as part of their programme, science talks as part of their programme, and their international audience was as high as their national audience and their local audience from there on in. So again, it's about being able to demonstrate what you've been doing from there. Whoops, okay, who's that we've got without unmuted? Don't know who you are, but
Christopher, can you mute, please?
I seem to be met.
How do you mute? Hang on, sorry.
Did you want to say any more, Vanessa, on cultural opportunity?
No, I think we're fine. I mean, we can take questions on specifics, but I think we've covered where I think it's about thinking, as Caroline has said, about where you've had partnerships, where your input has been significant as part of the creative of a cultural event, or developing work where areas have become more accessible through the work that you've been doing.
I think the only thing that I would say is the Arts Council for the last few years has been running a programme called the Creative Partnerships Programme, which has been about providing opportunity within those areas there which have the lowest rates of participation within arts and culture across England. And one of the things that you may find yourself is that you've been involved in work providing, so it could be about providing lighting equipment to an outdoor festival which has taken place within an area such as Bradford, which was on a recipient of the Creative Partnerships funding, because active engagement by the local community within the arts and cultural sector has been relatively low in comparison to some other areas. So again, it's thinking about whether you've been involved in any of that work, and the work that's brought newer and different types of audiences to arts and cultural events for your co-hosts who you've worked alongside, for the arts organisations that you've worked alongside. But it's about your role in providing that. Without your input, that event may not have taken place and may not have generated the audience from there that they ended up attending the event. So that's really the key one. And from my conversations with Arts Council, that is the one that they will be looking at first and foremost to understand. So you may have ticked all the other boxes in terms of your planning, your presentation around what you've done to manage the risk, the financial risk and the impact, and what you intend to spend the money on. But if you can't demonstrate cultural significance, then they will not be going forward with your application. You'll find that it's going to be rejected. The other key area that is going to be assessed is on diversity. The Arts Council has a commitment to widening and broadening all of recipients of arts and culture, be it audiences, be it groups that participate as actual participants, be it getting the next generation of creatives into the sector to be able to come forward. And their commitment to diversity is incredibly strong. And again, this is a key area that they're going to be looking at where you sit within the diversity framework. So what they want to understand from you is how you work and how your work has a diversity impact. So what they're looking to do is what you do at the moment in relation to diversity. Do you have a diverse workforce? That's primarily, for most of you, is going to be where the focus is going to be. So organisations, if you have a diverse workforce, if you have gender spreads in terms of your employees, if you have a diverse workshop in relation to ethnicity and race, then you need to be talking about that from there. If you don't, you need to be identifying that that is a challenge that you recognise and you understand, and what you might want to do about addressing that issue from there. So, for example, if what you find yourself is you work within a workforce that is predominantly men, within the sector, what you want to understand is that you recognise that there are fewer women that you would employ from there. You've understood that to be a key priority, and what you might look to do to bring in women who might want to come through. And it could be about that there is a lack of opportunity for young women to come into the profession, and what you're looking to do is you're looking to understand that and add to that by doing a particular piece of work, or by looking to understand what role you can do within that. Diversity for you is primarily about your workforce. It could be about your client base. So it could be about, you do a lot of work with BAME communities, black and minority ethnic communities, around the provision of arts and cultural opportunity. It could be that you provide services to a number of the community festivals. It could be that you provide lighting at a community arts centre that has a particular programme around diversity, and that you understand that this is key to where Arts Council is sitting at this moment in time in terms of the provision of funding. if you think over the course of the pandemic, what we've seen is the rise of and the prominence of the Black Lives Movement. That comes on the back of work that people like Lenny Henry have done is in doing his assessment of access into television for young minority ethnic trainees to come into the profession. It is a recognition from Arts Council that this is going to be a key issue that they wish to address. So what you'll need to be able to think about is how you can respond to that, how you will open up access. What they're not expecting is that you put within your application is that you will take on 3 BAME or 3 young women apprenticeships from any way, shape or form. And I wouldn't belittle you and say that that was what you were going to do to get your hands onto the money, but they're expecting that you have an understanding that this is an issue in terms of funding and what you might be able to do, what your role is in terms of meeting that. This is one where you have 350 words, which in all reality is about 275 words to actually write within that. But again, it is a key issue on what you're going to be assessed against as part of Arts Council from there. That may well be one of the questions that you have, one of the areas that people struggle with. One of the things that Vanessa and I are offering to do is to do 2 things. One is to review any applications as they come forward for any organisations that may want to. And we have suggested there that if organisations are really looking to consider putting in an application, that we would be available to help complete the applications working alongside you. There are areas where we would expect your input to come to the fore. So in terms of the financial planning that you're putting forward, that is going to primarily come from your team because you understand how you're going to be shaping it. What we will do is help verbalise and frame that in an Arts Council way from there. I think the thing that I would say to people is what you need to do is clearly consider, is this the most appropriate set of funding for me, given that it is a 3-month window of opportunity for, as we said before, 25% roughly of your annual turnover. And I do appreciate that for many organisations, they have had nothing over the last, near 12 months from there. But what you need to weigh up is actually, can you realistically demonstrate that you are both culturally significant, you're involved in work that is culturally significant, and as we've said, it's not just at the top end level, it's not just I'm working with the Royal Albert Hall, we work with a number of the major and international providers and international festivals, but it does come right the way down to culturally significant within Bradford, within Bolton, within Bournemouth. How do we provide to that cultural ecology that exists within that area? And without us, without our key role, their work couldn't take place. There is a real case to be made that most of the museums, most of the arts venues that are operate only because they have incredible sound, incredibly dynamic lighting. They have access to some of the best digital technologies that exist within the UK, and some of the most creative people are sitting second stage from those venues, and that's within all of you from there. But it's about being able to demonstrate clearly to Arts Council that you sit within their remit and you are ready and you should be considered for their funding. That's the end of the presentation, and I appreciate that some of the questions that you will have, you may not have found the answers to. Some of the questions, it may have thrown up more questions for you than answers. You may now want to say, goodness me, what on earth are we going to do about this? So what we'll do is, in terms of the chat, if Vanessa, are there any key themes that are coming through in the chat area that we haven't covered as yet?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some questions about, is it restricted to the 25%? I think, as Caroline has emphasised, they're looking at this as being really representative of that first quarter of the financial year. They're not looking at this as being a survival package for going forward. So they are stating they would not expect anyone to apply for more than that 25%. I think you would need to give a very, very strong case as to why you would be applying for more. There was also a question about if you already had a loan in place to cover loss over that period, could you still apply? I don't know, Caroline, if there's
Yes.
any guidance on that. Perhaps you might want to answer that one.
Yes, you can still apply if you've had a loan in place to cover the period. If you've taken out any of the loans that have been available, if you've taken out a commercial loan, you can apply for this funding to take place. The loan would form part of the income that you put together. So if you have had a bounce back loan, you include that within the amount of income that you've received over the year. You will express it and flow it out within the documents and the financial information that you need to supply from there. But as I said earlier, in terms of any of the other government programs of money that have come out, you will not be able to use this money to repay back any of those loans, because that would be seen as the government funding itself to then pay back itself from there on in. So there are very clear guidelines. Just a word of warning is that one thing that tripped up a number of people last time round is that what you will need to be able to do is when you come to make your application, when you go onto the portal, you'll need to provide a key set of financial information from there. And I've spoken about it, but I'll reiterate it. You need to put in a cash flow template for the period, and the period that they're taking is from 1st of January 2021 right the way through until 1st of April 22. So that extends beyond this particular period of the grant from there, but they're looking to get an understanding of where you came in and where you then carry on after this particular loan has been awarded. They're looking for both a cash flow template, they have a template within the application form for you to complete, and also a detailed budget. And in the budget, that's where you can write down in note form as much information as you can about the assumptions that you've made and about the decisions that you've taken and about the way that you've come to those figures from there on in. The bit that did fox a number of people last time round is you'll need to provide a balance sheet as at the 30th of December of 2020, and that needs to show the actual levels of cash within the business and the actual level of cash within the business that you held on reserves from there on in, and that needs to be produced by your accountant and verified by your accountant from there to be able to put that forward from there on in. And you'll also need a balance sheet projection as at the 31st of March to show what you expect the projected level of cash and restricted and reserves to be at that particular point of time, together with any of your financial statements from the last 2 years. So you do need a significant amount of financial information, and the balance sheets were the particular ones that tripped people up. They were unable to provide that or hadn't realised until it was too late to be able to do that. The other thing that you'll need to do is in the application form is you'll need to put in a delivery plan, i.e. over the course of April, May and June, how are you going to spend the money, how are you actually going to deliver on what you've said you've done. And for many organisations, that isn't something that they're necessarily familiar with. It's about the key tasks, the key milestones, the key decisions that need to be taken over that period of time that you as a team will need to be thinking about and getting in place ready and whilst you're operating within that period of time. So you'll need to be able to provide that as well.
Can I just, we've had a number of questions about the reserves, Caroline.
Yep.
I think that from the guidance, what they're saying is you can, within this, make sure that you have got 8 weeks of reserves at the end of that 3-month period.
Yes.
What they're not expecting is that you apply for 8 weeks reserves while you already have reserves in hand. But if you can show in the application how you've used the reserves to remain sustainable during the period, you can actually ensure that at the end of the 3-month period, you have got 8 weeks in. So if there's a shortfall there because you've used up some of your reserves and it only represents, let's say, 3 or 4 weeks of reserves, you could actually put that in as part of your application. They don't, I think what they're saying there is they don't want organisations to be completely drained of their reserves by the end of June, and therefore not able to continue. There's also been some questions, Caroline, about the 10% on the capital expenditure. Are there any other percentages that are being requested, or is that the only one, along with the 25% of turnover?
That's the only one that they've been very explicit around. What they're looking to do is they're looking to see that the likely spread that you've got over your main areas of expenditure are in line with your previous areas of spend. So if what you did was previously you spent over the course of 3 months, if 11% of your expenditure was on staff salaries, but within your budget this time round that has suddenly doubled up to 22% of your expenditure, they will want to know why that is, why is that increase happened, and whether or not they will then make a decision on whether or not they think that that is a reasonable level of increase to take from there. So that's a key question. But the capital expenditure is because the money is primarily about supporting organisations and the delivery of the work in preparation for full return to opening or full return to delivery of whatever it is that you do, rather than being sunk into capital costs that could at some future point be lost. So if it's gone into buildings, if it's gone into equipment and the organisation fails further down the line, that money will then have been essentially lost from the public purse. So there's been grave concern, and I think this is largely around the not-for-profit sector, because there were significant amounts of calls on capital costs for building to keep buildings going, and they in the end they both produced a capital programme to respond to that, because what they didn't want was the emergency funding disappearing into capital. I did note within the comments here, sorry Vanessa, one more point about the unlikelihood of any accountant being able to do any form of balance sheet return by the end of this period, simply because of where they are and sit within the tax period. I fully understand and fully agree, and that was a point that has been made to Arts Council. This time round, and interestingly, we're not too sure why, this time round the demands and requirements on the financial expenditure are slightly more than they were within both the emergency funding. In the emergency funding, which was the first pot, it was literally write down what you've got and we will give you any form of money. There was nothing there that asked for proof. In the first round, they asked for a balance sheet, but they didn't ask for quite the same level of financial information. And whether what this is about is that the public's appetite that money has been thrown at the pandemic, and we need to make sure that it is being used and used widely. Whether that's where this is being caught up, we don't know. So getting your balance sheet together could well be a challenge if you know, for your accountancy firm from there on in.
Just a couple of things. In terms of on Grantium, someone has said if you're an individual but you work, you use freelancers under a company, you would need to make sure it's shown as a company. As Caroline said, it needs to show that it's registered.
Yeah.
So a single person, they're very clear, they will not fund individuals. So if you make an application, to make sure you profile it as the organisation. Read the additional support from local councils. If you're going for part B of question 5, they're asking for letters of support. There is a sort of maximum size of documents that can be submitted. So to make sure that those letters of support would come within that maximum size once you've submitted the financial level of information requested as well. Categories on the cash flow. I'm not sure, Caroline, I know that I had somebody with this problem the last time. I think you show your cash flow template. They have one there, and if it's not relevant, you just add the sections
Yeah.
that are, because clearly it's designed for the organisations they normally fund, but don't be put off by that. Just add the lines that would be yours and leave the other ones blank.
Yeah, so where it says in their current cash flow artistic programming, if you don't do whatever you do, consider it and use the term artistic programming, but you use another term to describe whatever it is your expenditure, just change that on there. The word of warning that was given out, and it did fox a number of people last time round, is that do not attempt to put in a first row at the top of the spreadsheet or a bottom row at the bottom of the spreadsheet, where just be above the totalizer, because the grey cells cannot be affected in any way. And what happens is if you add in a last row just prior to the total box, it will not be included within the final total. And I know that's teaching grannies to suck eggs and everything, but it did, the numbers of organisations that got tripped up on that, even when they were using their professional advisors, financial advisors, etc., that still was a real difficulty for everybody from there. If you're a parent company and you're making an application on behalf of one or more organisations, then what they're suggesting you do is you use the cash flow and the budget templates that they've got, but you add in separate sheets for every organisation within that from there. So it is quite a significant bit of work that you're going to have to do, but that's what they want to be able to do, is they want to be able to identify for each specific company subsidiary element what the position is for that. I did note that somebody has said with a turnover north of £4 million that actually the amount of money that is available is relatively small. It is. It quite simply is. The first round of money that they put out, they had anticipated that there would be a good take-up. They were actually overwhelmed by the level of take-up that came about from there, and that what they intended to do was that they then came back out with this much smaller pot of money, and it is by Arts Council's own admission a much smaller pot of money of £250 million. It is really about those organisations that need that 3-month injection of cash to keep that business moving along. As Vanessa said, anyone who is looking for more substantive investment above and beyond that, this is not going to be the programme where you're going to be covering those costs. You might get a relatively, or in this case, a really tiny contribution if you are successful. They are expecting it to be hugely competitive. Last time's round, the first round, they described as being competitive, but this time round they are expecting it to be hugely competitive, even though, and one of the things I think for you in the commercial sector, even though the not-for-profit sector has had a significant number of tranches of money that have been made available over the time. So the not-for-profit sector, as well as the Arts Council money in terms of both the emergency funding that came out in April of last year, and then the first round of the Cultural Recovery Fund, has also had and has also been able to access the National Lottery Heritage Fund money in some instances. It has also been able to access a number of philanthropic programmes that have been made available. So one of the big major funders of arts charities, the Garfield Weston charity, released £40 million that they made available as a special one-off programme for those large cultural organisations, not-for-profit organisations within the UK. So there is a feeling from Arts Council that for the not-for-profit sector, they have had several bites of what is still a small cake to meet the demands that they have from there, but they at least have had some slices of cake. For some of you, you haven't even got to the picnic table, and I think there is a recognition from them that this is where they have made some decisions in the first round that they need to look at and make sure in this second round that those decisions are being weighed up. So have they made sure that, for example, commercial companies, the support sector within that has actually received and is actually able to receive some form of funding, however small it may well be. And I appreciate that, you know, 3 months turnover is not exactly what we would all be looking for at this point in time. But that's one of the conversations that has come out from Arts Council, is that they recognise that there have been other opportunities that other sectors have been made available, have had access to, that you may not have done. Let's see if there's any other questions.
Can I just reiterate that, because there's a lot of questions coming in about lost period and work that's later. This money is to ensure that you are looking at coming out of where work is not available. So there's been a question about our work wouldn't happen to August. This is in order to ensure that you're looking at that transition from a period where there isn't the work to work that you will be doing in the future, so that companies, they're not surviving, but they're planning for the future. So that's why it's this 3-month period. Again, as Caroline said, when they first brought this out, which was money left over from the 1.57, I think the assumption was that in the spring, and they actually state it in the guidance, we would be moving forward much faster.
Yeah.
No one at that point, and if you read the guidance, you might go, did they have blinkers on, saw another full lockdown coming. So I think what unfortunately, because that guidance is about, here's your 3 months, because we assume that by Easter, things will be starting to move. We will have to see, but I think you need to take that assumption that by the spring, you will be working with your clients and your organizations about work that's going to keep the company continuing. So it's about business continuity rather than business survival.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to say is, if you didn't receive any money in any of the other rounds of funding that they've had, unfortunately, that's not an issue for them. It is not about making good or making up what happened previously. As Vanessa said, it's the focus is on the how do we move out of the pandemic, with the assumption that Arts Council has made is that the pandemic is more or less going to end by June of 2021. Now, we all may at this point in time wonder whether that was the correct assumption. It was the planning assumption that they made when they were putting the guidance together. And I think one of the questions that was asked of one of the senior, I was listening to a senior level Arts Council discussion the other day, was that do they anticipate there being more monies coming forward? And at the moment in time, the word is no, this is it. The 1.57 billion that was given was significant and was substantial, and this is where it sits. Who knows whether that will be the case, whether we will then find that there is further work and further monies are available. We just don't know. We've had a question coming about geographic spread. Going back to the question around the national and international significance, you may be based in one particular area and work across the UK. What you need to do is you need to think about how you meet the cultural significance across the wider UK, not just in the area that your head office is. The location of the office is immaterial. Tell us and talk to us about the areas where you're working with those communities that have low and poor take-up of arts, culture, arts and cultural investment at the moment in time, or where you're involved in work that has, as we said before, that national and international significance from there on in.
There's a question here that you may want to put to the Arts Council. There's a question here about foreign ownership of a limited company but domiciled in the UK. I think from our perspective, it would be as long as the work is done, and it does say that at one point, where the work is done in England, which means a Scottish company could apply as long as the work they're applying for would be in England. I don't know, Caroline, that would eliminate somebody as long as they're domiciled in England and the work is done in England. I think it would be eligible, but you might just want to check that with the Arts Council before you do an application.
yeah, it is a question that you'll need confirmation, but the guidance seems to suggest that that is something that you would be able to secure the work. And the example of, as you gave there, Vanessa, about other coming into, there could be an argument to be made from the other nations, the other 3 nations coming in from here, from there. Okay, I don't know whether there are any particular or specific questions that anybody has. I had received a couple of questions before. One of the questions that we've included there is in terms of, we've spoken briefly about the reserves position and what Arts Council means by restricted and unrestricted money. It's money that can be or can't be spent depending on how it was given over from there. For most of you, that is not going to be a relevant point to make. What you have is you have free reserves, or you have unrestricted cash that sits within the business that you could choose to spend. The question will be is, as we said when we went through the application in the finance section, is why have you chosen either not to spend it on or to spend it on, depending on what you've done? So that's the answer that you need to give from there. And as we said before, is anything that takes place outside of the period. So some of those costs you may well be able to include, but you would not be able to include. So if, for example, you're planning a festival and the majority of the work takes place in the autumn time, but you have some costs that come forward, you will be able to include some costs within that period, April through to June, but you certainly wouldn't be able to include all of the costs that you will incur up until October, because that would be rejected on the basis that those costs aren't incurred. Where you need to have, and as I said before, is you need to have contracts in place, signed contracts that expenditure is due and owing, and they will allow you to transfer some of the money over. So, for example, the organisation that Vanessa and I have just finished working with, it's a studio complex, had some funding to support the drop of revenue that they were anticipating within this financial year during the first round of funding. And because it was specified and agreed that they could have that money to support for this financial year, it was a relatively small amount of the overall grant that they were given that was agreed. Had they asked for the whole of the rent costs to support the whole of the rent costs for the next financial year, that would have been refused, because it would have been seen as being way out of proportion with the level of grant costs that they've got. And as I say, the issue, I think, for many commercial organisations is it's roughly 25% of your turnover for the quarter. What would you spend in a normal year's quarter, and can we give you that to keep you going, is really where it's going to be. I'm just wondering if there is anything that anybody says, that anybody has questions that we haven't answered. It looks, from my scan down, oh, somebody asked how long for us to get registered on Grantium, please. It usually takes, you register yourself, you put in your organisational details, you know, all the various details about company address, status, number of directors, etc. It usually takes 1 to 2 days for it to be registered. But again, they are experiencing huge demand, and so it could take slightly longer from there. But make sure if you are going to go forward, that you get forward and register on the portal by the 21st of January at 5 o'clock.
I would suggest that actually, even if you're just thinking about this, the sooner you register on Grantium, it doesn't commit you to anything because you've not actually made an application. And it does mean that should in future there be grants that you're a lead organisation on, or you're working with organisations, you remain registered. So they have said that the 21st of January for the latest. I would not necessarily, you know, if you are considering it, I would do it as soon as possible.
And the other thing that somebody did raise a point about the repayable grant scheme, if anybody has gone forward, because I know a number of organisations have considered and have gone forward for the repayable grant scheme, the finance programme, is you can't hold awards from both of those programmes. So if you've gone forward for that, that's where you've kind of thrown your hat in the ring. You have to wait and see what happens. There was an argument being made to Arts Council that they should have allowed for organisations to go forward for both and then to have made the decision about which one they accepted. The suggestion seemed to be that that wasn't the feeling, that the way that it was going to be, the scheme was going to be introduced by the government. So that's why they split it and had two separate dates. You have missed the repayable finance deadline. That was 7th of January. So you're now only in the running for this. Okay, I think what I'm saying is that what I'm seeing is that the majority of questions that we've got there have been answered from there. What I was going to do was for those that think now at this point in time, it is for you to think about whether you wish to make an application. We are looking to do another session on Friday afternoon, and it may well be that for you that you go away and you think very carefully and consider about whether this is going to be an option, and that rather than run through the programme to the same level of degree on Friday, that what we do is we simply use that as a way to ask and answer any more questions as they come in or as they occur to you. It may well be that that might be a better use of time if anybody wants to come back and do that. I appreciate for some of you, you will at this point have said, for 25% of my turnover, I'm not going to throw my hat in that ring from there on in. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to unmute everybody. And if there is anybody who has a particular burning question that they must get answered, then we can take that from there. Now, my technical skills are fabulous, so let's see whether we can actually unmute everybody from here. Unmute all. Right, this may well be where we get huge amounts of feedback. But if there is anything that anybody says now,
doesn't matter if anyone has a question, I guess if they unmute themselves,
yeah,
then we can't see everybody on the pages. So if you can just unmute yourself and say I have a question or something like that, or put your hand up if we can see you. Anyone?
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
hello.
Yeah, over here. Oh,
Is that Glyn? Are you with a question, Glyn? Glyn
No.
O'Donoghue?
No,
No.
well.
Oh, you.
no, it's next to Glenn. Hang on. Yeah.
Dee, what's your first name?
SJ,
SJ. Hello, SJ. Go ahead.
my question refers to supporting information and how you go about that. So the budget template they've given us, are we okay to add sheets to that and explain where the numbers came from? Because on the previous round, we could submit our own cash flow forecast, not using their template, and I had all my accountancy notes there. Is it a case of copying them over and just adding them as an extra sheet? What's the best way of getting that information over to them?
Right, this question has come up several times in all of the rounds from there, and one of the things that Arts Council are saying is that given the sheer numbers of applications they are expecting, what they want to be able to do is use a template that is familiar to themselves and to their members of staff who are assessing and making sense of that information. So they are recommending that you use their templates and you add notes and information into that template as you go along. One of the things that happened in the first round, and one of the things that they said was that it caused some difficulty, was that people supplied information in numerous different formats, and what they're looking to do is to clearly, quickly identify key information that they're using to assess your financial viability with, and to do that in the simplest of ways. So my advice would be use their templates, add in further information that you have from there. I know it's a lot of work, but if you use their templates, you are at least helping them on their way. The other thing is that their grant officers will range in all sorts of levels of experience in dealing with this programme. They haven't got enough senior grant officers to only allocate those to the programme. So you will get people who they're unfamiliar when they're looking at unfamiliar packages of financial information. So make it easy for you, make it easy for them, and fingers crossed it works in your favour.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone got anything else?
Yeah, I've got a question, which is this sort of a part one, which is the eligibility part, to then open up access to the application itself. You're asked to put in a figure into part one in order to then be able to open up and fill out part two. Would you say that it would be okay to put a figure in part one and then it's changed, and then when like a like not a temporary figure, but like an approximate figure, rather than an exact figure in part one?
Yes, it is okay to do that, and I have done that beforehand. Although I would say if it was me doing the application, given where you stand at the moment, is I would be working on the financial information that supports my bid via the template. And if you haven't got the template, I can email the template through to Nikki to send out to you so that you can actually put the final figure in. Because although I've done it both in terms of project grants and in the first round, in one of the applications that put forward, we went in with a figure one and then we amended it in figure two from there. We actually got that one. What you don't want to do is do anything that throws a glitch in and somebody says, hang on a minute, why is this altered? If only, you know, by a matter of a few £1,000s from there. Anybody else? The one thing that I would say is that some of the Arts Council staff are very, very helpful in terms of the responses that they give. The grants management team are on standby at the moment in time and they are answering enquiries. So if you do have particular enquiries that you want to be able to have answered, then and you can't find it within the guidance, on the Arts Council website, there is a significant amount of guidance and some questions and some key areas. If you can't find it in there, then if you drop them an email, they do come back. Occasionally you'll get multiple responses, as I have had when I've sent in enquiries that it's been picked up by several people and all responded to. They are doing that as part and parcel of it. And as Vanessa said, they've got two further seminars that they've organised, one which is tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock and one which is on Monday at 12 noon. Now, I understand that the one tomorrow, when I looked at it earlier on, it was full, but the Monday one did have some spaces, but they are putting up recordings of. The only unfortunate thing is that what you don't get is you don't get all the chat and the questions that people have asked, and some of the questions that you've asked are very similar to some of the questions that have come up, but you won't get a response to that. So it will say, they will just give you the information as it's there, but you might find that there is something on there if you were to listen to one of those, if you've got the time in doing all the work around the application.
Hello, I have a question this time, actually.
Okay.
Thanks. I anticipate losses between April and June. So the difference in my expenditure to the income that we're going to receive in. But I have reserves in place, including CBIL loans, to cover that. You know, I've planned in advance and I have that scanned out. Am I the wrong sort of person to be applying for a grant like this?
No, what you can do within your financial information that you submit and the supporting answer that you put within the application form is you can detail the assumptions that you've made and the responses that you've got in place to meet those losses and why you have chosen to take that particular action from there. So there is nothing to say that if you've had a loss within the company that you can't go forward and apply for that. What you'll need to be able to do is do a clear and concise explanation. Probably one of the issues will be around the use of the CBIL. Why haven't you used the CBIL so far to date, and why are you hanging on to that from there? But if what you're saying is you're waiting to see where the level of losses ends up before you start repaying that from there, that is a natural assumption that a business owner could choose to make in this particular time, and it is something that they are willing to consider and go along with.
Thank you. I mean, the honest answer is we'd rather have a grant than a loan. Like I'm sure a lot of the people on the, is that a valid answer or not really?
I think that to say that is probably a little bit too forward. I think that's a little bit of front to get you through that. I would have said something around what you're looking to do is you're taking a more conservative outlook about the future as it's projected, rather than the way that the government or the Arts Council are seeing it, and that you know, you want to make sure that at the end of the process you are still there. That's why you're hanging on to your loan, rather than saying, I'd rather have the grant than the loan. And I work with all organisations, and that's the only reason why they go for grants, is they'd rather have the free money. Wouldn't we all?
Okay, I
thank
think
you.
the other thing there about the loan is that given there's been the second lockdown, within your planning might be to use that in this way, but now you're reserving your options to ensure that there's business continuity beyond that June period.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Very helpful.
Yeah, I think it is partly one of the things that will happen is about the skill that you have in writing the application in a way that presents your case, as with everything, in the best possible light. Those organisations that applied in the first round, and particularly for a lot of the non-profit organisations, a lot of the applications were about, we need the money because we need the money. And it's obvious that you need the money because you need the money. Those organisations that were able to say and present a clear argument as to what would happen, what would happen if you don't get the reinstatement of business, what would happen if the incomes that you anticipate from your various activities don't take place, what will the impact then be? That's the bit that they're really interested in, that what you are doing is you are seeing ahead into, and as we've said before, both Vanessa and I, this is about the business continuing to operate. This isn't about hopefully plugging the water as it coming over the walls of the dam. This is about you continuing to operate in what we all know will be the new normal. This is going to be, you know, it is going to be so different from where we are now, and so different from where we are when they issued the first set of grant income from there on in. Anyone else? That could well be everything from there. What I will do is I will ask Nikki to circulate mine and Vanessa's details, so that if you are looking to come back and seek further support from us, then please do so. If what I do over the course of the next few days, while we've still got time for people to start writing applications and thinking about it, if either of us come across any information that we feel you should know, then we'll forward it to Nikki to send out. So it could be that there is a good example of, or we've heard this is going on from there, so we can try and provide you with some form of information from there on in. Other than that, I think we're going to close the session, and my God, do I hope that some of you companies come out of this alive at the other end, because the cultural sector is not going to survive unless we have every single aspect of it. It's not simply about the stars out the front, it's not simply about the artists, but it's about all of those people like you who provide it, make it happen. And I'm seriously wanting to get back to some great cultural activity over the next few years, with or without my mask on.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, Caroline and Vanessa, for this, and thank you to all of you for being there. I know it's a really difficult time, and I wish you all lots of luck with the applications as well. So as Caroline said, we are doing another session on Friday. We do have new people also coming into that session that have already reserved, but you're very welcome to come along, and if you have a look over the next day or so, it might be quite helpful because it might get you those, as you said, Caroline, those questions that you're still not quite clear on. We will be circulating Caroline's details and Vanessa's details and everything else, that, you know, the slide presentations and a link to the recording, which we hope should be by the latest tomorrow morning, if not later on today. Okay, so you can access this recording as well. Apologies for the mute bit, but that's technology for you. And just to say, on another note, it's not a bit doom and gloom, but on a Brexit note, we're also running some sessions on Brexit. So introduction to classification of goods for those of you that do that stuff on the 19th of January. But there's some free ones as well coming up on HR, on trademarks and transport. And we're trying to find someone from UKCA, which at the moment is quite tricky because I don't think there's a specialist that exists in UKCA, as it's a new area that's just been put together. So we'll let you know about that. And also just to say to those of you that aren't involved on We Make events, do come along. It's on Fridays. You can register for the details on www.wemakeevents.com. If you go down there, you can sign up to that. And every morning every Friday at 9 o'clock, we have lots of conversations. There's a lot of work going on in the political team at the moment. So I think for a lot of you that might be quite useful to come along to as well. Just to say that. So thank you all, and thank you again to our presenters, and good luck. Okay, thank you.
Everybody.
Keep safe. Bye-bye.
Fingers crossed.